Teachers. What's the worst situation you've returned to after leaving the classroom? Showed up to my class a few minutes late to find the entire class, urged by one of my final year helpers, had switched off the lights and hidden every nook and cranny of the room. One of them managing to get themselves stuck behind a sink pipe. Of course, I happened to be late because I was walking and talking with the deputy head who wanted an explanation from me as to what the hell was going on. I bet the stuck student's still behind that sink pipe. They just really committed to the bit. Story 2. Not a teacher, but in the 6th grade we had this English teacher who was always flying off the handle in a rage and would slam her fist down on her metal podium like a gavel, so the kids would shut up and sit down. One day the teacher left class for whatever reason, and another kid in my class quickly went up to the podium and pulled out a screwdriver and quickly loosened every screw he could find on it and sat back down. Lo and behold, the teacher came back and eventually found the kids to be too talkative and slammed her fist down and the whole podium fell to pieces. It was a hilarious sight to see until the teacher started to cry. I felt bad, even if she was a mean old witch. Story 3. Well, I had to step out for a phone call about a student in class. I didn't want him to hear me talking about him or any other students. This was when I was still working at a middle school and have since moved on to high school. I thought it'd be a larger improvement than it was, but certainly haven't had a situation like the one I had in middle school so far. Anyway, I'm outside of the classroom for a maximum of 1 minute. They all start talking when I announce I have to leave the room for a moment and pause the lesson. I'm fine with that, but about halfway through my phone conversation, all talking stops and it's perfectly silent. Come back in and a kid is sitting on my desk with a stapler against his head, threatening that if his girlfriend, also in the class, doesn't get back together with him, he'll end it all right there. For some reason, maybe because it was early in the year of 7th grade and they're still young, she completely believes that if he presses that stapler against his head, it's over. So she starts begging him to put the stapler down and that she's sorry. While this was happening, I was basically letting it resolve itself because 1, I didn't think the kid had the guts to do it, and 2, the girl was trying to talk him down. The situation resolved itself, but I decided to send him to the principal's office because it was not something he should be doing. I think the parents should be concerned and know it would be hard to focus on the class afterwards. While I'm walking him to the hallway to explain why I'm doing this, he screams, "Jennifer, I love you!" And she starts crying. Hormones or some crazy crap. Story 4. Kids can be freaking cruel as heck. My English teacher in junior year of high school is basically pestered by one of her senior classes she taught that year. On top of all the psychological, emotional, and behavioral issues she had to deal with on a daily basis from them, someone put a thumbtack on her chair and it got stuck in her back when she went to sit down. She walked to the administrator's office to show them what happened. And then later that year, someone put eye drops in her coffee or drink when she wasn't looking, and she was running to and from the bathroom for the entire day because it made her pretty sick, obviously. It was her first year teaching, too, and while she wasn't the greatest teacher, she didn't deserve any of that crap. She would sometimes break down in tears during our class because of what those seniors were doing to her. She got so fed up with their BS, she wrote the entire class up one day, and a lot of kids were mad at her. But like I said, they made her life a living hell for no reason. My class wasn't perfect by any means either, and there were a few troublemakers, but nothing like what those other kids were doing to her. I think the worst thing my class did was some people kept asking her if she was pregnant all year when she clearly wasn't. More annoying and irritating than anything, really. But didn't cause her physical harm or try to get her sick. Story 5. Not a teacher, but a student. It was my first year in high school, and it was the French final. The teacher was outside doing individual oral exams, and it was his first year teaching. Turns out, one of the students had popped some strong edible gummies, and they were kicking in. Before he had to take his exam, he started spinning in the wheelie chair with an expo and drawing on the board with every turn. The class took it as a screw it, let's have some fun. 2 smoke devices popped out of nowhere, and a smoking competition began, and all hell broke loose. Teacher came back and was just like, "What the heck is up with you high schoolers?" and never spoke a word to anyone. It was a memorable freshman year, to say the least. Story 6. Right, so my old religious studies teacher collected water bottles, like loads of them. Her desk was absolutely swamped with them, and they proliferated over the 3 years I had her as a teacher. I counted them one day, and if I remember rightly, there were at least 25. Most of them had never been opened, and even the ones that had were still mostly full. I remember when we started the topic of poverty and she opened the discussion with the old, "Millions of children in Africa go without clean food and water," which the irony was not lost on. Eventually, we were probed to find out why she kept all this water, and it took a while, but she told us. She was a religious woman, and it turned out she believed that when God turned her water into wine, she would retire. One day, she left the classroom for some time to speak to someone or other. Someone in her class just happened to have blackcurrant squash on him, so we added it to one of the water bottles to make it look like wine. When she came back to the room, she was obviously skeptical. but we all played along for the rest of the lesson and even afterwards. I didn't think she was really convinced, but she did indeed retire at the end of the year, and whether it was by divine providence or if we just annoyed her that much isn't for me to say. Story 7. When I was in middle school, I had this classmate who really liked electricity, the more destructive forms of it. He always carried around this DIY shorting plug, and he used to plug it into the school sockets when no teacher was looking. One time, the computer class teacher left the classroom for some reason. Once he did that, the classmate got to do his thing. He plugged his plug into a socket, interrupting my UT 2004, I think it was a 2004, a version of Unreal Tournament anyways, match. And then he confidently walked up to the breaker panel, reset the breaker, and failed to restore the power. As it turns out, the breaker failed to do its job, and the guy's feat of circuit shorting actually burned cable in the school's electrical system. He was not punished for it either. None of us reported him. Snitches do get so-called stitches, after all. And if the teacher had reported him, well, he'd have admitted to leaving a class full of students and full of computer equipment completely unattended, so he didn't. Story 8. My high school had this very old, 70-plus-year-old man who taught economics and also was the ISS teacher. He could be quite blunt. He'd been in a war or two, had his wife pass away literally in his arms in their kitchen, and didn't grow up well in Saudi Arabia. So he could be a bit harsh at times, but was generally hilarious and loved by a lot of students, except for one student who got ISS daily. So, one day, while the old teacher had stepped out, the student got up and mixed liquid cement into his coffee mug. He ended up in the hospital for a while, but survived. The student, obviously, ended up arrested and in jail. Story 9. When I was in 8th grade, my teacher had to step out for a phone call, and everyone started talking amongst themselves. The kid was sitting in the seat closest to the door with his back to it. Right as my teacher opened the door to come back in, he stood in his chair and yelled, "I may be a skinny Indian kid, but I have a thing the size of Jupiter." Didn't see my teacher initially, but when everyone burst out laughing and pointing at my teacher who was now just standing there staring at him, he noticed and got super red. To this day, I have no idea why he felt the need to announce that to the whole class, and without him knowing, my teacher is behind. Story 10. During my last 2 years of high school, a new high school is being built to replace our current one. They did the first half of the year in the old school, then during Christmas break, they tore down the old school, turned the space into the new parking lot, and we returned after the break to the new school. On the last day before Christmas break, everyone was antsy to take part in the destruction of our 70-year-old high school. My history teacher left the room and all hell broke loose. A couple kids started bashing chairs into the wall, breaking big chunks of it down and creating a huge hole in the wall between our classroom and the neighboring one. Kids were running back and forth between the two classrooms while others were trying to stick as many chairs as they could in the wall. Soon after this started, the chaos began spreading to the rest of the school. Kids were running through the halls, yelling, dashing lockers, and throwing papers. It was insane. Meanwhile, the VP was losing his mind on the intercom, ordering everyone to stop. The teacher came running back in pretty quickly and everyone stopped, but the damage was done. And a lot of the damaged stuff was stuff that was supposed to be transferred over to the new school. Story 11. My 7th grade class spent a week messing with one teacher. Not sure why she kept leaving us alone. I think she may have had another class before ours where she had to be on the other side of campus. The first day, we hid in the workroom attached to her room so she walked into an empty classroom. The second day, one student hid under her desk until halfway through the class when she went to sit down when he grabbed her ankle. The third day, we were all sitting at our normal chair connected to desks with the whole unit flipped upside down. The fourth day, everyone whose desk was in front of a window had their legs hanging out the window and their heads stuck through so they looked like they were sitting at their desks but were halfway outside. The last day of the week. When she got there, we were all sitting in our normal seats, upright and in their normal rows, lined up outside in the walkway leading to the classroom. Joke was on us, though. She was accompanied by the Dean of Discipline. Story 12. Not a teacher, but I've got a few stories. In 8th grade, a kid stuck a pencil in an electrical socket on the side of one of those science class tables with the outlets built in. Teacher came back and found him crying, and everyone else pretended to read. In 11th grade AP History, we had a really cool teacher. She left the room to watch another class. We were AP students, so we were supposed to be more mature. While she was gone, we turned out the lights and hid in the corner of the room so she couldn't see because of how the window and the door was shaped. It looked like we left. Dumb, but she thought it was funny. Senior year in health class, the teacher was also the football coach and was going back and forth between our class while we were taking a test and the locker room to monitor repairs that were being made. One kid stood on the desk to dance, be funny, and the desk collapsed. He lay there on the floor crying while we pretended to take our tests. Story 13. Back in year 10, 13 to 14 years old-ish, we had a fresh English teacher, completely new to the profession and quite young, early 20s. This teacher wasn't a strong person, and her class was known as one of the worst in the school. She'd get pestered and react poorly to it, essentially making it get worse. One time she left the room and someone blew up a rubber and we started batting it around. She entered back into the room and started screaming for us to stop. Obviously, we didn't. She started following it around the room trying to get it. After a few minutes, she gave up and went to get someone higher up, so in comes an assistant head teacher. "Pop that balloon right now!" For some reason, her calling it a balloon caused us to erupt into laughter. She eventually got the rubber and popped it and then took over teaching the class for the rest of the lesson. We didn't have the English teacher again much after that. The fact that the teacher never really came back says it all. That rubber was her Waterloo, her Everest, her balloon. Story 14. Obligatory, not a teacher, but was in the class. This was kind of intentional chaos. We were a GT, gifted and talented class that combined AP English and history. We were about to start a unit in Lord of the Flies, and to create a demonstration in human nature, our teacher told us she was giving us free reign of the classroom for, I don't recall, 20 minutes. Sure enough, it was chaos. Two teams formed and leaders took their positions as butcher paper was ripped and made into weapons or projectiles, and desks were stacked to create walls of defense. Thankfully, we were good enough kids to not do anything that couldn't be easily undone or actually hurt anyone. Pretty damn cool experience when you follow it up with Lord of the Flies and see that those kids basically did the exact same thing without adult supervision. Story 15. In my Latin class last year, the teacher left the room for about 20 minutes. She was trying to figure out how to copy some worksheets. She was a really crappy teacher, and hardly knew English, let alone Latin. Yeah, she was pretty low on the IQ scale. Anyway, while she was gone, everyone started taping random objects to the walls. Hand sanitizer bottles, water bottles, pencil holders, pencils, and even a bag with a sandwich in it. She came back and everyone acted like nothing happened. She didn't even notice what happened, and the class absolutely lost it when she was trying to look for a pen. One of the braver students even got up and got a squeeze of hand sanitizer from the wall. Story 16. We had a substitute teacher that none of the students liked. I somehow managed to excuse myself to go to the bathroom and came back to absolute carnage. First thing I noticed is that the tables and chairs had been thrown all over the place, and there was another teacher restraining a student, and the substitute was on the floor with a wounded nose. The other students were all stood around the room, shocked. They were asked to go down to the library and not go to other classes for the rest of the day whilst it was dealt with, and the teachers took witness statements from the students. I found out later from another teacher and a few friends that the substitute had mocked him over his father's very recent passing. That happened less than a week beforehand. The student snapped and went for him. Taking notice and finally listening to our complaints, the substitute wasn't allowed back to the school and the student got a one-day suspension. Story 17. Not a teacher, but the school was debating removing our lockers and forcing us to have clear backpacks. The entire student body was in an uproar, all 4,000 kids. The principal agreed to a debate with a student council president. I was also captain of the debate team and an absolute beast. When he found out this fact, he said he would only debate if questions were submitted in advance. The students disagreed and he called it off. 2 days later, probably 97% of the students showed up with clear backpacks and a strip of duct tape over our mouths, all organized by our amazingly charismatic student council president. They kept it on all day and into the next day until they finally relented and told us they wouldn't institute the policy. Our class president was amazing. It's a shame he ended up a user at 23 and passed away in a robbery. Story 18. Not a teacher, but in my Algebra 2 class, we had a teacher that literally couldn't control any class. We came into class from second block to third, only to find the teacher duct taped to her chair. Apparently, the football schmuck and his friends in her lower-level math class walked up with questions, only to duct tape her to the chair. Only the one kid that did it got a suspension, but I remember our class would play hide-and-seek with her. One student runs out of the portable, so the teacher chases them. Wait 15 seconds, then the next kid runs out and hides outside. First kid comes back and the teacher just says she's upset they did that, only to come to the realization that another kid has fled. This process repeated during testing time, so myself and another kid, Joe, would finish her tests and pass them around the class. It was not a productive period. Story 19. Principal comes in to discreetly tell me to go outside with her because she wanted to hand me the air conditioner remote. She wanted to talk about a student, but didn't really remember what exactly. I was probably gone for a minute, and the second I got back in, the entire board was wiped clean. It was a full board with graphs, formulas, etc. I was actually proud of my straight lines. One student was standing up, now entirely silent, staring at me. He was holding my marker in one hand and razor blades in the other. Somehow within 60 seconds, he managed to erase an entire board and half-jam a bunch of razors in my marker cap so I would cut the hell out of my hand when I went to open it. Story 20. It's too hot to eat lunch outside. Each class eats lunch in their respective classrooms. Lunch is when the teacher get breaks herself and aides come in to either supervise lunch outside or inside the classrooms. On one such hot day, my coworker stepped into her classroom for something during her lunch break to find that the aide had completely lost control of the class, and some Lord of the Flies crap was going down. Shelves and furniture literally overturned, kids standing on furniture, full-blown bar fight going on the group carpet, etc. She has a plant house in her class, and when she walked in, there was one kid swinging out of it through the window, another attempting to climb the roof, and a third boy literally taking a whiz inside. I heard my coworker's voice bellowing from where I was eating in the break room as she regained control of the class. She said there were kids who she's never had to redirect twice participating in a total madness. Story 21. I am answering the opposite question. I probably deserve any downvotes, but I am still so freaking proud I tell anyone about them. I ran a youth group, kids 12 to 17. On one trip to go volunteer at a homeless shelter, I had to leave them alone to do something for like 30 minutes. When I left, they were lounging on sleeping bags, playing cards, etc. I and other adults returned to find that they had A. cleaned up the room, B. arranged a bunch of chairs in a circle, and C. decided to hold a discussion group to think about what extra project they could tackle to make homeless kids arriving at the site feel more at home. They set up a paper chart and an easel to write down ideas. Cried. I was so impressed. Second trip, we were in D.C. working in soup kitchens. I took a full van to go see the Lincoln Memorial. I had to stay with a van due to parking issues. When they came back and got in, they continued the conversation they had started about what the Founding Fathers would have thought about our current state of separation between church and state. The kids are all right. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 22. In year 8, 12 to 13, my best friend at the time decided in the middle of an art class to get sellotape and tape his face in a distorted manner. And when the teacher came back and asked in a horrified tone, "What are you doing?" he replied, "I'm now a plastic surgeon." I ran in between tables screaming and laughter. The teacher sent us all out, and we watched from outside as a female art teacher in her 50s and someone who the teacher's radio when kids are misbehaving chased a 12-year-old around a room for 5 minutes. Honestly, when I replay that memory, I add the Benny Hill song because it fits so damn well. Story 23. I had a kid with autism who was just transferred from an out-of-state school. The kid did not have the skills to be in an inclusion classroom, but the powers that be were slow to get him into the program he should have been in. On several occasions, I walked into the classroom to him screaming because some minor thing had obstructed his routine. I was honestly impressed with my kids because several of them took it upon themselves to look out for him and try to keep him safe while advocating to every teacher they saw that he needed more help than he was getting. I was really proud of those kids. Story 24. My German teacher once left the class to go to the bathroom before class started. The class was literally 5 feet from the bathroom and he rushed to get back. Everyone was waiting, and this 8th grader was being slightly annoying, and a senior started on him somewhat playfully, but still enough for him to get hurt. The teacher gets back and freaks out because he's new and a fight is happening in his class. The senior was suspended, but I can't remember if the 8th grader was because he just took it. His mom also sued the school for the 2 small minutes the teacher was gone. Story 25. A math class in my year managed to pull the projector off the ceiling, smash the teacher's computer, break a couple of chairs by throwing them around the room, open the window. This class is on the 3rd floor, and throw every jotted textbook and piece of paper out into the teacher's car park and then somehow throw a chair out the window. Now these windows are very small to prevent people from falling out, so I'm pretty impressed that they were able to do that. Anyway, the teacher walked back in, looked at the mess, and walked straight back out and left. Nobody knows if he got fired or just left. This whole thing happens in about 5 minutes of the teacher leaving the class, by the way. Story 26. In my high school AutoCAD class, me and 2 other kids changed our teacher's background to an inappropriate symbol while the teacher was away from his desk, helping someone, and it was right as class was ending, so we just left after. The next day we got to class, the teacher had it blown up on the projector and was angry yelling at the class trying to find out who did it. As he stands in front of a giant inappropriate symbol in the wall, yelling, another teacher walks in and looks at the wall and sees the teacher pacing back and forth, yelling, then just walking right back out of the classroom. We eventually told the teacher it was us later in the school year, and he just laughed and called us idiots. Story 27. I'm a teacher, but this story comes back from when I was a student. I had after-school detention with 2 of my friends, and the teacher went to get something copied before time started. While she was gone, we decided to play frisbee with a blank CDR. It was all fun and games until I missed the couch and the CDR hit the window. It didn't break the whole pane, but it did break a piece off in the corner. We moved a potted plant in front of the crack and spoke nothing of it. She didn't find the crack until the end of the school year. Story 28. This is a little different. I was the teacher, but I wasn't the one to leave the classroom. A student and I orchestrated a prank. This pupil asked out to the toilet almost every day I taught him. It was almost the end of my time teaching the class as I was just in maternity cover, and I mentioned him to my sister. She was the one to suggest the prank. Once he had left, I had the whole class stand up and swap sides. When the people came back, we let on like nothing had changed. He was super confused. The entire class played along, I played along, the classroom assistant played along. We eventually broke and told him because he looked like he was having a mini existential crisis. Worked really well though. Lol. Story 29. When I was in high school, it was a normal daily occurrence for at least one kid to escape out a window. Nobody really minded. He came back. The teacher stories are pretty standard. Everyone hid, some girls hid under my desk to scare me, and proudly announced that they had farted there. A girl filled a Windex bottle with Gatorade before I got there, then drank it in front of me. A boy hid in the closet for half the class period. They turned all the desks backwards. I rolled with it and taught from the back of the room, etc. My favorite is when my 7th graders try to creep me out by sitting too still and in total silence, then all saying in chorus, "Good afternoon, Miss Blank." Story 30. I am a kindergarten teacher. My students are 3 years old. One student ran out of the classroom, so I ran after and caught him. The entire chase and catching was less than a minute. I came back to my classroom in a state. 2 students had whizzed themselves. One student was jumping in a puddle. One student was trying to wipe it up with her handkerchief. One student was trying to climb to get to the box of tissues to help, and 3 students were bawling their eyes out for no apparent reason. The reason was later given that the female student had talked to one of the male students, and the other male student, who has a crush on her, didn't like that. There was some amount of pushing, and then they started crying. 3-year-olds can cause a natural disaster just by existing. Story 31. When I was a TA in college, I left during a discussion in a freshman class. I think I was grabbing quizzes to be handed back, but I'm not sure. The professor was teaching the class. He was a sweet old man. One of my favorite teachers. He was like 82 and had Crohn's. He collapsed. The other TA and a few good people were helping him. Others were mocking him. The smell. He was so embarrassed. To see someone so vulnerable and sad was heartbreaking. I've never graded so hard in my life. That class had the wrath of us 2 TAs, all but the kids who helped. I only taught for 2 years on my own, but had multiple TA classes. I would have considered myself a professor that was pretty lenient when it came to grading. If you tried, showed up, did the reading, etc., I would give them the benefit of the doubt. Not that semester. Story 32. Teacher was in the room and I was the student. But one day I had learned in chemistry class that you can light hand sanitizer on fire in your hand, and because it just burns the alcohol, it doesn't hurt your skin. Fast forward a couple of hours to pre-calculus. Our first-year teacher gives us a few minutes to start on our homework after the lesson is over. This amazing trick is fresh in my mind. I decided this is the perfect moment to try this out and impress all my friends. I put a bunch of hand sanitizer in my hands and found a lighter in my backpack. But the chemistry teacher fails to mention that alcohol burns with an invisible flame under fluorescent light. So after 10 seconds or whatever, the alcohol is running out and my hand is getting really hot. I think, oh well, it didn't work. Walk over to the trash can and let the remaining hand sanitizer fall out of my hands, completely unknowing that it's actually on fire. So I accidentally started a small trash can fire in my school trying to execute a harmless prank. Yeah, I got in some trouble for that one. That's one way to make your pre-calculus class a little more heated. Story 33. I was not the teacher, but one of the students involved in a said situation when the teacher left the class. I'm 25 now, but it was my sophomore year of high school and we were in economics 7th period, last class of the day. My teacher was a middle-aged germaphobe that hated kids making noise in the hallways before class was over. We were literally playing cards after we finished our work. He was an odd individual. There was less than 5 minutes before school was going to be dismissed for the day. He steps out into the hallway to walk towards the noise down the hall. Kid next to me throws the playing cards on the ground as a joke. I just picked them up and resumed playing. He did it another time, and then once more after that. On the final time, I stood up and said, "Want to freaking stop?" The joke had gone old. I was trying to finish our game before class was dismissed. Spoiler, we never finished the game. Kid in the corner, "What are you going to do about it?" So I punched the kid. He then proceeded to tackle me over a desk. The teacher comes running into the room, which is in a frenzy with a huge fight going on in the middle. Teacher comes running into the room right after I get tackled over the desk and tells me to go to the office immediately. Single best part about that day was that it just so happened to be parent-teacher conferences. My mom always attended. I can't imagine what was said between her and the teacher. Courtesy of the events that day, I got a nice 5-day weekend. Story 34. My 6th graders had earned an ice cream party. They voted and decided they wanted to make their own ice cream. I got up at 5 a.m. to go buy all the ingredients fresh that day. I had no place to store all the ice and whatnot in my tiny apartment. I must have spent $200, but I didn't care because I was excited for the fun day with my kids. I showed them how to make the ice cream and then stepped out for a few minutes to go get paper towels. When I came back, the floor was a swamp of milk, salt water, and ice. Syrup and sugar had been caked onto every surface. Someone had shattered the measuring cups and broke the measuring spoons. Kids were soaked. Kids were laughing. Kids were screaming. I walked out, got the janitor, and stood in the hallway while she screamed, full-on vein-popping rage at the kids. Then she made them clean the room themselves. The kids were loudly complaining how unfair she was being and how mean I was for not letting them finish making ice cream. I just sat in the hallway and cried at how dumb I was to waste the money. They didn't have another party the rest of the year. Some of their teachers canceled their parties too as punishment. Story 35. Not a teacher, but done to a teacher. 8th grade science teacher looked like a gorilla. Now when I say this, I don't mean it as some people would. Herder, she's black and black people come from monkeys. No, this lady was porcelain white, dirty blonde and like crystal blue eyes, but she looked like a gorilla with a blonde wig. I remember the exact day this all happened because it was September 11, 2001. A family member of mine was scheduled to be in Manhattan. Morning we couldn't get through on our phones to him. Everybody was worried sick. Every other teacher that day had the news on. Let us talk about it in class and had no problem with me trying to get a hold of my family member. And I mean call, busy signal, hang up, call, busy signal, over and over again. This teacher was the type that we were on her time. This is her class, no matter what's going on outside. My attitude was that I could either sit in class and keep making my phone call until I got through or I'm out. Just as we got through that little argument, my phone connects, and as soon as she realized it, she tried to take it away from me. A couple of the bigger guys got in between me and her so that I can talk to my family and get out of the front door before she could stop me. After that little stunt by her, she found a banana in her desk almost every day for the next month. Now, out of 5 of my good friends in that class, I can only account for 6 days worth of bananas. Well, 7 because I did it twice. I'm still not sure where the other 20 to 23 came from. That was one thing I loved about my junior high school. There might have been BS drama between the cliques and infighting because of teenage BS, but when it really came down to it, we knew when to have each other's backs. Story 36. This is only tangentially related. Once, in 8th grade science class, I fell asleep pretty soundly at one of the lab tables. The teacher managed to orchestrate the entire class gathering all their belongings and leaving the room, then had the principal come in and ask me what I was still doing at school. My response was the classic, "Bleh." Well, I noticed with no small amount of horror that I had drooled over the table. The principal went on to explain that all the buses had left and was doing a final walk through the grounds before locking up. Despite living literally 3 blocks away from the school, I flew into a panic as he offered to call my parents. I jumped up and gathered all my things, made a half-meant attempt to use my sleeve to address the drool. I was looking around frantically for a clock when all of a sudden, the entire class started laughing at me through the window. Turns out that the room was right next to the entrance to the school. The students only had to walk a short distance around the outside of the room to get a view inside from the back wall covered in windows. They were half-length windows, so the whole class, including the teacher, was huddled at the windowsills watching me flip out. Holy crap, that was embarrassing. I got wrecked by the teacher with the principal's help. I was really happy to move out of state at the end of the semester. It was hard to live that one down. Story 37. Obligatory, not a teacher, but our Mandarin teacher left us in the classroom for about 10 minutes. While he was gone, we all stood up on chairs and stuck all the sheets of paper we could find to the bottom of the air conditioning, where the suction would keep the papers up. We thought it'd be funny to see if and when he noticed. Naturally, the first thing he does when he comes back in is complain about the room being too cold. He switches off the air conditioning and a whole torrent of paper just rains down over the classroom. He was annoyed, but hadn't been in the room, so he couldn't exactly single out anyone in particular for punishment. So we stayed in to pick up all the paper. Dude had a bit of trouble controlling his classes. Well, maybe more than a bit. Pranks and other incidents were pretty common in Mandarin class. Story 38. I'm going to answer the question with best instead, because I teach kids in rehab in a detention center, so it's almost always a worst-case scenario. I was at the detention center and I rarely, if ever, need to leave the room. One time a child had just been informed that his grandfather had passed away. I'd passed out assignments and normally half the kids don't care at all about doing work. The child who had just lost his grandfather normally participates in class, but he was grieving, so I let him be. I was asked to leave the classroom for a minute because our supervisor needed to speak to me. When I returned, all the kids were doing their work and 2 of them were helping the grieving child. Their usual idea of helping is more akin to copy the answers off of me. But this time, they were actually trying their best to explain. I had to go for a good, heartwarming cry in my office after that. Story 39. I didn't even leave. That's the worst part. I teach English. In my previous job, whenever a colleague was off sick, we'd have to cover as much as possible and try to continue the lesson the kids are supposed to have. So one day during my first year at that school, I was the sub for arts and crafts. I asked the kids what they had been working on, and they said clay figures. So I get them to get out the clay and everything else they need, and I decided to join them. So I'm happily sculpting away, and the kids are doing great, and the end of the lesson draws closer, so I tell them to start tidying up. It wasn't until most of the kids had left that I noticed little blobs of clay stuck to the glass domes in the ceiling. Kids had been shooting or throwing clay up and had never noticed. They'd even managed to stick clay into the keyhole of the door. I was so embarrassed. I was never in any trouble for it. Everyone thought it was your typical new teacher's screw-up. Story 40. Oh, I, as a student, not a teacher, sorry. I've had so many crazy things happen throughout my school year, so I'll list the biggest ones. Middle school. Teacher left the classroom, and when he came back, the classroom was in total chaos. All the tables and chairs were flipped because the class was essentially playing dodgeball with anything they could find and were using the tables as cover. Two guys were having a fake fight, but with tables and chairs. One kid picked up a table as a shield, and the other hurled chairs at him, and they both laughed their back off. Some third guy collected all the math books from other students and built a literal life-size fort out of them for whatever reason. The class was mental, to say the least. Middle school. We were having a chem lab, and my friend and I got into a heated argument. I got so bad to the point that we were literally trying to end each other. I still can't remember what we were fighting about, and we made up like 5 minutes after the fight. High school. The class was talking a little too much, but nothing out of the ordinary. Suddenly the teacher snapped, hit the board with his fist, walked out of the classroom and never returned. Not even the next day or the next week. He returned 6 months later as if nothing ever happened. Surprising because he was actually one of the chill teachers who made jokes every day and was on pretty good terms with us. Everybody has their limits, I suppose. Middle school. A 60-plus-year-old physics teacher decided it would be more fun to discuss how hermit crabs function instead of teaching physics, and he wanted to demonstrate how they change their shell, so he jumped into a large paper recycling bin and started crawling across the floor. That same teacher also once asked if anybody wanted to see his karate moves and hit the top of a table so hard that a screw fell out. Just like the screws that fell out of his brain when he became a complete psychopath. I wish I was making this crap up. Story 41. A former teacher at the school where I taught last year had her coffee spiked with hand sanitizer on her first day with us. She didn't come back after that, obviously, and the dean of students told the 7th grade class who did it that she passed away to get the students responsible to come forward. It worked, and inspired me to get a coffee mug with a lid. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.